So, on behalf of Deldot and Sussex County, everyone, we're really thankful that you're here with us this morning. As Andrew mentioned, I'm Jeff Rigner. I'm a consultant to Deldot on the 5 Points Transportation Study. The last several weeks have been a really challenging time for a lot of us for a lot of reasons. And we hope that this virtual open house gives you an opportunity to see that uh, normal things are still going on, and there's a chance to separate ourselves from current events to focus on other things. I am pleased to say, though, that even during the course of the pandemic, Deldot and Sussex County have been moving forward with a lot of work associated with the 5 Points Transportation Study, and we're happy to share that with you today. Today's drop-in session also gives us an opportunity to provide focused online public engagement, which we may use to supplement our regular in-person meetings even when COVID-19 is behind us. So we're not only interested in hearing from you about the 5 Points Transportation Study, which is the main focus of today's meeting, but also about how online public engagement works for you. And in fact, there'll be a poll question at the end of today's session that will give you a chance to weigh in on that. So the presentation today will last about 20 minutes, including a couple of interactive poll questions for you to participate in. We'll leave most of the session as an opportunity to answer your questions. The presentation here is available on the website for your reference, and we will have a recording available as well. You're welcome to ask questions at any time during today's session. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can before we wrap up. Andrew Bing, who you heard from at the beginning of the consultant team, will serve as our moderator, and you'll continue to hear from him occasionally during today's session. So during the session, please type all of your questions or comments in the Q&A box, which is located at the right side of your screen. You may need to click on the little right arrow that's shown in the graphic there to pull it up. Alternatively, if you scroll your mouse over the main screen, a circle with 3 dots in it may pop up at the bottom. Click on that and click on Q&A. Both of those methods should work to get you to the Q&A box to type in your question. If for some reason either of those methods does not work, please don't hesitate to email our behind the scenes project manager who's hosting and running today's session, Jen Sinelli, at jennifer.sinelli@delaware.gov at any time. Her email address appears at the bottom of most of the slides in this presentation, so you can refer to it later. And we'll have several presenters available to respond verbally to your questions. But before we get started, we have some questions for you. Andrew, would you like to kick off our poll?
Sure. So I'm going to ask, there it is, Jen, to pull up the poll. So you should see on the right side of your screen our first poll question. Again, if for some reason you're not seeing it, as Jeff mentioned, go to that circle on the bottom of your screen that has the 3 dots, click on that, and as you do, you'll see polling will pop up. You click on that, and that'll get you there. But hopefully it is there already on most of your screens. So our first question is, how did you hear about the 5 Points Virtual Open House? And for this question, you can click all that apply. So it could be through the following 5 Points email update, through other email, through the website, social media, newspaper or newsletter, a family member or friend, or some other method. So if you could just click on one or more of those in terms of how you heard about today, we would be happy to get that information. Again, we're always trying to figure out what sources are working in terms of the outreach we do. We always try to get as many people as we can to attend our sessions. All right, well, hopefully that's enough time. Jen, I'm going to ask you to close it out, and there'll be a little bit of a lag before we get the information to pop up. Okay, so a few people through the following 5 Points emails that we send out, also through other email, and a couple people through the newspaper or newsletter. So again, we appreciate you you doing that for us. Why don't we go to the next question, Jen? Okay, so what is your age? So this is one where obviously you only fill out one. The first one is up to 18. 19 to 34 is letter B. C is 35 to 49. and we have 50 to 64, and we have 65 plus. We also have a prefer not to answer. Again, the reason we ask this question is, we're trying to reach as broad a cross section as we can, and we're trying to see whether these virtual meetings, who we're reaching during these meetings. We know who shows up to our in-person meetings. We're able to sort of see that based on who shows up, but this helps us understand who's showing up to the virtual meetings. So I'll ask Jen to close that out at this point. Okay. And most of the people who showed up are 65 plus. So, okay, again, doesn't tell us anything more than just who's on today. So we appreciate you all being on, and I'm going to turn it back to Jeff Rigner, who's going to go through the presentation, and I'll be back on at the end. So thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Andrew. And on to the meat of today's presentation about the 5 Points Transportation Study. During what we call phase one of the 5 Points Transportation Study in 2018, a working group composed of a number of members representing the community, along with input from hundreds of members of the public, developed 78 recommendations for transportation and land use improvements in the area in and around the 5 Points intersection. With continued input from an expanded working group as well as from the public, we've focused on implementation in 2019 and beyond. That's what we refer to as phase two. So the purpose of this virtual open house is to provide information on our 2019 5 Points annual report. The virtual open house has two parts. The first part is website materials at 5points.del.gov. If you haven't looked at those yet, it would be good to do so because they go into a lot more detail than we can in today's presentation. The second part are 5 drop-in sessions. You're participating in the final session of those 5. Thank you. So we wanted to provide folks an opportunity to ask questions, not just to get information. So if you haven't already, please click on the website, go to Virtual Open House, which is in a blue bar at the top, and then click on 2019 5 Points Annual Report for more information. Now, the annual report really focused on 3 primary things that we'll discuss today. The first is meetings and communications that occurred in 2019, implementation progress that was made during the course of that year, and then finally, proposed priorities to move forward in 2020. Let's start with meetings and communications. So we have 20 current working group members that were selected by DelDOT and Sussex County to provide a broad representation of interests in the study area. A number of these working group members, the ones with the asterisks next to their names, served in our phase one working group that developed the recommendations I mentioned earlier. This group started quarterly meetings in April of 2019, and barring global pandemics, meetings are held the last Monday of January, April, July, and October. Although we were unable to hold a meeting in April, we're committed to do one in July, whether in person or online, and you'll hear more about that later. The study has certainly benefited as well from active public participation. As I mentioned, hundreds of folks participated in workshops or working group meetings in phase one. Our phase two working group meetings have, even though we've gone past the recommendation stage, are still averaging about 40 members of the public in attendance at each meeting. So whether you've participated in past meetings or this is your first opportunity to learn more about 5 Points, thank you. We really appreciate your input. Additional meetings were held in 2019, and they included hearings for DelDOT's Capital Transportation Program, or CTP, that were held last September. The CTP is a list of the projects that DelDOT will undertake over the next 6 years. DelDOT Chief Engineer Shante Hastings, who you'll hear from later in today's presentation, gave a presentation to the working group about the CTP process so they could learn more about how projects are selected for the CTP. So based on input received from the hearings, the draft CTP for fiscal years 2021 through 2026 was approved by the Council on Transportation in February. Funding for transportation projects in Delaware comes from both state and federal sources. So federal approval of the CTP is required, and that will be sought on its regular cycle in September. There were a number of projects in the 5 Points area that were in the previous CTP that continue to be carried forward. And they include the following: grade separated intersections on Route 1 at Cave Neck Road and at Minos Conaway Road, improvements to US 9 Kings Highway between Dartmouth Drive and Freeman Highway, improvements to Plantation Road between Route 24 and US 9. The first phase of those improvements starts at Robinsonville Road and extends north to US 9. And in response to some previous questions, I believe we'll be showing a video showing what some of those improvements will be in phase 1 later in today's session. There are improvements to Route 24, some of which are under construction between Mulberry Knoll Road and Route 1. The realignment of Old Orchard Road at Westcoats Corner to bring it in at the signal on Savannah Road opposite Westcoats Road is currently under design. And finally, improvements to the Lewis Park and Ride and Maintenance Facility, which are known as Phase 2. Thanks in no small part to the work of the 5 Points Working Group and the public through this study, there are several new 5 Points area projects in the draft CTP. They include an intersection improvement at US 9 and Minos Conaway Road. That consists of a southbound right turn lane from Minos Conaway Road onto Route 9. DelDOT will begin studying widening US 9 from Ward Avenue, which is just west of Route 1, to Old Vine Road at the Vineyards. An intersection improvement is planned at the multi-leg intersection of Cave Neck, Hudson, and Sweetbriar Roads. DelDOT will also look at widening Beaver Dam Road, Route 23, between the Route 1 connector and Dairy Farm Road. There are 2 intersection improvements proposed on Old Landing Road at Airport Road, including an extension of Airport Road, as well as at the intersection of Warrington Road. And finally, the potential to implement findings of the new road master plan, which is currently in draft form, between Nassau Road and Old Orchard Road. So what does all of this mean in summary? A really significant investment in the 5 Points area. So the 6-year program between state and federal funding is proposed to spend $116 million to address really pressing transportation issues in the 5 Points area. And that investment is due, as I mentioned, in no small part to the 5 Points Transportation Study. Communications also included website updates. Our latest website update went live in March of this year. We would love to see your thoughts. If you'd like to enter them in the Q&A box or in the survey that we mentioned later on in the presentation, we would be happy to hear what you think. Then finally, our primary communication method with members of the public has been our following 5 Points email series. Generally speaking, following 5 Points emails are sent out at the end of each month that we don't have a quarterly working group meeting, so typically 8 times a year. But we also use these emails when special messages need to be sent, such as preparing for these virtual open house drop-in sessions. So that was meetings and communications. How about the progress that the 5 Points Transportation Study made in 2019? The summary is that we made great progress. In 2019, 38 of the 78 recommendations, or just about half, were underway or complete as of the end of the year. So the complete section that you see to the left has 2 categories. 10 of the recommendations were actually done, and 3 of them are classified as ongoing. Ongoing means recommendations that are part of DelDOT's or the county's everyday way of doing things. They can't really ever be classified as complete, but they're baked into the county's or the state's standard processes. Now, as we do our annual reports, we'll continue to show bar charts that show the status of each of the 78 recommendations from Phase 1. At the beginning of 2019, on the left side, there were 7 projects that were listed that were already completed, 14 that were in progress, and the rest were in some later stage of development. By the end of the year, as I mentioned earlier, 3 were ongoing, 10 were complete, and 25 were in progress. So year after year, as we continue to implement the plan, the blue ongoing and dark green complete bars at the top of these charts will continue to get bigger and bigger, and the light gray at the bottom, longer term projects will continue to get smaller as we track our progress. In fact, the implementation plan that's on the website right now shows that we've already moved one additional recommendation to complete and another one to ongoing during the course of 2020 so far. So even with the challenges we're facing these days, we're continuing to make progress, and we're committed to continue to do so. So what is likely to happen in 2020? Well, certainly we're going to continue to work on the 24 recommendations that are currently in progress. DelDOT and the county will continue to work together jointly on the Henlopen Transportation Improvement District, which is a method for dealing with transportation impacts of developments, primarily on the west side of Route 1 in the Five Points area. Both agencies will continue to work with developers on all projects in the area and elsewhere on transportation improvements related to their developments. I'm pleased to note that during 2020, we'll also begin work on 5 recommendations that have not yet started before the end of the year. I'll mention them now. Recommendation B8 is to study the feasibility of a parking management system to alert travelers when parking lots at major destinations are full. This was initiated primarily due to the parking lot at Cape Henlopen State Park being full on many summer weekends. When this system is implemented, likely as a partnership of a number of entities, including DelDOT, DenRec, and owners of other parking lots that may participate, folks who are traveling into the beach area will be able to see a sign that tells them whether parking is available at key destinations. If it is, they can continue to that destination. If not, they're able to park at, say, the Lewis Park and Ride and take a shuttle or a bus to be able to get to the state park. Today, they're faced with driving all the way out to the state park, finding the lot is full, and returning to Route 1 or some other destination to try to find a way to get there. This should certainly save traffic in the area as well as aggravation for travelers. Recommendation B25 is to identify the costs and benefits of dedicating Nassau Commons Boulevard, which is currently a private road, to public use. Nassau Commons Boulevard, if dedicated to public use, will provide an important connection between Route 1 north of 5 Points and Route 9 west of 5 Points. Recommendation C6 is to study the feasibility of lengthening left and right turn lanes throughout the study area. During our January working group meeting, a number of members of the working group gave us suggestions for locations to consider. Recommendation C12 is to study access management opportunities along Route 1 in the study area, including potential connections between businesses. Access management means not just connections between businesses, but the potential to consolidate driveways and provide a much safer and better environment for folks to be able to access all of the properties along Route 1. One area that we're starting to look at now is the potential to provide direct access from southbound Route 1 to the Lowe's property without having to get to Plantation Road. Those discussions are starting now. And then finally, recommendation D9 is to identify potential connections to and from the Lewis Transit Center. So that's it for our formal presentation about what happened in 2019 and what's on the books for 2020. So we're now pleased to address your questions regarding the study. Our moderators will compile questions related to the study and forward them to the folks listed below to answer. You're welcome to offer comments in the Q&A box as well. We'll keep notes of any of the comments you leave, although we may not pass them on to folks to answer. So we are joined by the 3 distinguished panel members today. The first is Shante Hastings, who is Chief Engineer of DelDOT, who I mentioned earlier. Second is Josh Thomas, also from DelDOT. He's DelDOT's representative to the 5 Points Working Group. And then third is Jamie Whitehouse, who you've seen at some of our working group meetings and workshops. Since we last met in person, he's been promoted to Director in Planning and Zoning for Sussex County. So I would ask our panelists to please go live. And Andrew, please let us know what questions have been offered to us.
Great, very distinguished panelist. And then there's me, who will do the moderating here. So again, thanks to everyone. So as we're going on here, as Jeff said, we're happy to answer any questions you have, although we understand that not everyone who attends a session like this necessarily has any questions. Right now, we have not received any questions, which is okay and which is not unexpected. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask our panelists a few questions that we've received at one of the prior virtual open houses that we've had. And maybe through this discussion and dialogue, some other comments or questions will form. But if not, we'll keep doing this, and I think you'll find it helpful. So what I'd like to do is start maybe on the southern end of Plantation Road first, and then I'll kind of work my way up. But we received some questions about the widening of 24 between Plantation Road and Robinsonville Road. Also, we previously had received some questions about extending Mulberry Knoll Road. So first, maybe we could get an update on 24 between Plantation Road, kind of going west.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So the Route 24 project, the first phase of it is currently in construction. That project widens 24 to 2 lanes in each direction from Route 1 to Mulberry Knoll Road. And then for the second phase of that project is Mulberry Knoll to Love Creek. A lot of that second phase deals with operational improvements, but we do carry that 4-lane section through the Beacon Middle School, Love Creek Elementary intersection. So there's a project that's currently in construction. The second phase is still in design, and we're in the right-of-way acquisition phase for that. So that's the current widening plan for Route 24. For Plantation Road, it is also a 2-phase project. It starts from the Route 9 intersection and heads down to Robinsonville Road. That stretch of the project is a widening of Plantation Road, as well as a realignment. We do have a video on our 5 Points website that has a simulation of specifically what that intersection at Route 9 and Beaver Dam and Plantation Road will look like. That project is just about to start right-of-way acquisition, and we expect to be in construction in 2022. The second portion of Plantation Road from Robinsonville down to 24 is still in the early design phase, and we're actually kind of evaluating different alternatives. As part of the 5 Points working group recommendations, we were asked to look at whether or not we should widen Plantation to a 4-lane section. And so we are evaluating that. We're actually looking at 2 lanes in each direction, 2 southbound lanes and 1 northbound lane, and then just the widening for shoulders and pedestrian improvements. So there will be more to come on that in the next few months.
Great.
I'll let Josh take the Mulberry Knoll extension question, Andrew.
Hey, Josh.
Okay. All right. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So Mulberry Knoll is actually a really good example, in my opinion, of consensus building in the area. It is recommendation E2, I believe. So it's it's a recommendation of the 5 Points working group that we look at a connector road in the area, and then also out of the transportation improvement district, the Henlopen TID. It was through that technical analysis and evaluation of future traffic. Mulberry Knoll Road extension was identified as a viable future improvement in that area. So, like I said, once again, it kind of shows some consensus building of the working group's priorities, plus also the technical analysis and the results of that. So obviously there's a lot of moving parts here that will get us to the next steps of Mulberry Knoll. But where we are right now is that we're working with Sussex County on the on the next steps for the TID, and we can get into that later as well through some other questions. But so as I said, Mulberry Knoll is one of the concepts in that TID. But right now it is still a concept. So what that means is we have to do further study to actually go out and do specific outreach, to do environmental coordination through the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, as you may be familiar. So we have to do a specific study to identify potential alignments and work with the community to work on a preferred alternative. So until we actually are able to do that further study and get it prioritized and added to our capital transportation program, it won't show up in that CTP as a project. So there are a few steps that have to happen before we can get it to be an actual project.
And Josh, the recommendations that came out through the 5 points transportation study, some of them are shorter term or even more immediate types of projects or operational things. The Mulberry Knoll, that's more a longer term type of effort that we wouldn't expect to see something in a year or 2 years. That's a very long term project. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. We, as I said, we have to do further study. There's a lot of requirements and also just best practices that we need to do, to do this right. So we are still in the planning phase for that. And then once we get to that planning phase where we feel like we've done the technical analysis, we've gotten the public feedback, we've built some consensus on what the project should be, then it gets introduced formally through the CTP development process. And when that happens, that's when our fellow DelDOT employees, through Shantae's team, can actually take it to project development and start working on a design. Right. So it is definitely a longer term project. It's obviously it's a more expensive project. It requires a lot more right-of-way considerations, environmental considerations. But as I kind of mentioned earlier, it to me it definitely I guess not just to me, but to all of us involved, it definitely demonstrates the value of the project that that it's being identified through so many sources as being a viable option to kind of help the local circulation and also mitigate some of that future development.
Right. So we did get a question about the Minus Conway grade separation. So I'm going to ask that, but I do want to. Josh touched on something about a TID. Josh, just what does TID stand for? And then I'm going to come back after the Minus Conway question, and we're going to talk about that. But just so everyone knows what TID stands for. Sure,
it's a Transportation Improvement District. It is just a real quick definition. It is a formal district, or a boundary, right, of an area that is identified as having, a lot of development potential. There's a lot of proposed development in the area. And what that does is working with a local land use agency, such as Sussex County in this specific example for Henlopen, we're able to do a coordinated land use and transportation plan to make sure that that the future development is kind of timed out with transportation improvements, and that there's additional funds to do that.
So I want to come back to that, and when I do, I'm going to bring Jamie in from the county to talk about that. But let's go to a couple questions that we've received from the public. So what is the status of the Minus Conway grade separation project?
Great. I'd be happy to answer that. The project is currently in the final design stages. We are starting the right-of-way acquisition process. So working with all of the property owners that are affected by project needs, and also working with utility companies on relocations, et cetera. We expect to wrap up that process, have the right-of-way finalized and in our possession in time to start construction in 2023. If the right-of-way acquisition goes smoother, we would look to start that project a little bit sooner. But right now, our projection is that 2023 would be the start of construction, and it will likely take 2 or so years to build the full project.
Great. And then we did receive another question. Is there any consideration of an all-way stop at Dartmouth Drive where it joins Route 9 northbound access ramp?
I will have to get back to you on that. I'm not aware of any four-way stop studies that we've done, but we do about 1,200 different safety studies throughout the state each year. Our traffic studies group does. So I can definitely get your email address and get your response back.
So I think we already have it, but if the person who asked that question could just, again, through the Q&A, send your email, we'll get back to you with more information about that. So let's come back to the TID for a second, and then for those of you who are with us after we do a little bit deeper dive on that transportation improvement district, we will then spend a little bit of time on Plantation Road, the north side of it, up by the 5 Points intersection, and we will also show a video about some of the improvements that you can expect to see coming forward. But Josh and Jamie, talk about the relationship between DelDOT and the county related to the TID, and where the status of it right now and what people can expect to see, coming forward. Jamie, why don't you start?
Sure, yeah. So can you hear me okay, Andrew?
Yes, we can, Jamie.
So the TID was subject to a public workshop. There has been a presentation from DelDOT to Sussex County Council in the late part of 2019. There was a public workshop at the start of this year to which DelDOT and the county participated, and a great amount of public input was gained through that process. Now following on from the public workshop, there's been further discussion back and forth between the county and DelDOT in relation to the specific mechanics of how the TID operates. More specifically, the discussions that are being undertaken right now relate to the overall fee structure, the actual operation of the TID, and the introduction that Josh provided, and the overall strategic aim remains the same. And it is a more efficient mechanism for linking infrastructure improvement to housing growth within a defined area within a boundary. So the boundary has not changed. It is the fee structure that's being discussed. As those discussions on the TID progress and reach a conclusion, eventually the TID would then have to be brought forward to the county to go through the county's process. But right now it's still in the discussion stage, taking on board all those useful comments that were gained in that public workshop a few months ago.
Andrew, I think you're muted.
There's my 25-cent donation to the fund. I have to pay up now. Josh, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think Jamie did a great job of kind of explaining where we are with it. As I mentioned earlier, it's a formal agreement before it's adopted between the two parties, DelDOT and Sussex County. So we're still working on the next steps is that fee structure, determining the percentage that is received from developers, determining kind of what that looks like on the development side. So I guess really the only other thing I'll add is, well, one, I see Jeff has on the screen the workshop materials, which is a great resource if you weren't able to attend the workshop to go review those materials, and look at the concept plans that were developed. But I think one thing I'll add is that the concept plans are just that. The concepts were developed to help develop the cost estimates, right? Because in order to plan the future projects in the area and to come up with a program of projects and to work that fee structure to determine how much, what that cost sharing is going to be, we had to know we had to have a planning level estimate of what these projects could cost. So all of the concepts there have to move forward, through a CTP development process to become actual projects. But the workshop materials there are a great way to just get yourself more familiar with the concepts that were discussed. I don't know, Jamie, was there anything else? I think that's a pretty good summary of kind of where we are with it.
Myself there. No, I agree, Josh. It's at a high level, that is absolutely spot on and accurate. It's we could get into the weeds on this subject, but as there's further something that's been progressed.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on. We did get a follow-up question about Minus Conway. There's been talk about safety upgrades to Minus Conway itself. Is there any additional information that can be provided on that?
Sure, I can give a piece of it, and then I would probably ask Jeff Rigner to chime in as well from the recommendations from the working group. We do have a project in the CTP at the Minus Conway Route 9 intersection. That project right now includes a right turn lane from Minus Conway onto westbound Route 9. In addition to that, we will be evaluating that intersection for signalization. I believe there was a working group recommendation to look at additional improvements on Minus Conway. Jeff, could you chime in?
I sure can, and I'll actually pull it up so people can see how they can reference the information. I'm at the 5 Points website. If you click on virtual open house information, you'll see implementation plan. This is something that we update regularly, at the minimum quarterly, to show what progress is. I happen to know among our 78 recommendations, it was early in category C, which is make the most of existing roadway infrastructure. There were actually 2 related to Minus Conway. And these are very small on the screen. I won't be able to zoom in entirely, but recommendation C2 was to conduct a study at Route 9 and Minus Conway Road, as Shante mentioned, to determine if a traffic signal is warranted. A warrant study was done. A traffic signal was not warranted, but as traffic continues to grow in the area, that will be revisited as part of the project that Shante mentioned. The next one is C7, which is study the feasibility of improving Minus Conway Road with appropriate lane widths, shoulder widths, turn lanes, curvature, etc. That's actually listed as in progress because early in 2019, a curve safety study was conducted at probably the only curve on Minus Conway Road, the main one. And additional warning signs were installed back last March of 2019. But otherwise, the remainder of this recommendation is a longer term study, and we'll continue to investigate as we do on a regular basis, which of the longer term recommendations we can move to in progress and start our studies.
Great. And Jeff, why don't you stay on? Why don't we talk a little bit about the Plantation Road up by 5 Points? And I know you have a video that we can show, which I think while you're kind of explaining and while the other panelists are explaining the improvements, we'll kind of show it. As people can see, we're talking about a lot of stuff in and around the 5 Points intersection area. Our study, even though it's called 5 Points, really relates to the area around 5 Points because so much of what happens in and around the area affects the actual intersection. So what we're going to do right now is pull up a video for the improvements to Plantation Road, and Jeff and Shante can kind of talk us through that. And if there are any questions about that, we obviously can address them.
Sure. Shante, please chime in with anything you'd like to add. But on the virtual open house page, you'll see a simulation for Plantation Road Improvements Phase 2. So if you'd like to look at this later, you're welcome to click on that link. I'll kind of walk us through it now.
And Jeff, just to confirm, it's for Phase 1 of the Plantation Road project.
That's right. So that's and this is kind of an overview at the beginning before I start the video. This is looking from the west to the east. You're over top of Beaver Dam Road, and you're looking toward the 5 Points intersection, which is at the very top center of your screen. So this is what much of Phase 1 will look like. It will continue from Beaver Dam Road at the bottom of the screen. If you can't see my pointer, let me know. It goes to a roundabout, which will join a connector, Plantation Road, and a new connection to Saltmarsh Boulevard, and then continues as Plantation Road, and it curves in right by the Lowe's, which would be at the top right of the screen. The existing connector between Route 9, which is the diagonal road here to the upper left, into the roundabout is at roughly the same location as the existing connector, but it's much longer and wider. So there's a lot more opportunity to store vehicles during peak summer periods. There's also a new connection at the far upper left of the screen. I'm sure many folks have been guilty of cutting through the best hardware parking lot to come out to the signal opposite the connector at Route 9. With the state's purchase of the best properties, this new connector will be built to formally acknowledge that, so that folks will no longer need to continue all the way south on Route 1, loop back up on Route 9, and then onto the connector. Church Street, which is to the left side here in the light gray, is going to be cut off. This is a new connection along the current alignment of Beaver Dam Road to access some properties that are in this area in Belltown. But it's no longer going to be connected to Beaver Dam Road. And then finally, the last element on the screen, as I mentioned, there's a new connector off to the right side that goes into Henlopen Landing. We've been working very closely with the residents of Henlopen Landing to understand their concerns about cut-through traffic, and we believe that the new design is going to provide a solution that will provide them good access, but minimize the likelihood of cut-through traffic continuing through Henlopen Landing. The one element of the project that you won't see in the video, this is the most interesting part, but there will be improvements along Plantation Road itself off to the upper right that continue all the way south to Robinsonville Road under Phase 1. And as Shante mentioned, Phase 2 will pick up at Robinsonville and continue south to Route 24. Anything you wanted to add, Shante, before we go ahead and go into the video?
No, that was a perfect overview, Jeff. Thank you.
Sure. So the video shows two different scenarios. One of them is a simulation of existing conditions on aerial photography. And then finally, as we get further into the video, it'll show proposed conditions. So this is the same general view. We're flying over Beaver Dam Road. You see Church Street to the left, Salt Marsh Boulevard to the right. We're coming up on the connector. You can see the traffic backed up on eastbound Beaver Dam approaching the connector. There are other times of day we could have simulated that show lots of traffic on the connector backing up to Route 9. We're all familiar with those situations, and those are why we're doing the improvements to the project. So you can see as we switch from existing to proposed, the curve to Plantation Road is going to be expanded significantly. It's going to be widened. That area is going to have a stormwater management pond. And the roundabout is really going to be very efficient at minimizing the backups on any of the legs, especially the connector, because it's the shortest leg entering the roundabout. So we expect that it's going to operate quite efficiently, even in the future year that we analyzed. There are also some pretty significant bicycle and pedestrian improvements throughout the project area as well. So I'd encourage you. It's only a little less than 2 minutes, so go ahead and take a look at the website as we've shown you there, and look at it at your leisure. Feel free to forward us any questions you may have.
And I'd just like to chime in one other resource as we've answered some questions about the status of projects. On the deldot.gov/projects page, you can actually find up-to-date information on all of our capital program projects. You can do a search by using a map function. So you can just zoom in on a map to see a particular area and what projects are in that location. Or you can type in the search box in the portal, you could type the word plantation, and the projects associated with that word will come up. And again, it'll take you to the individual project websites that have a lot of information, helpful information on the current status. Thank you for pulling that up, Jeff.
Sure.
Jeff, you definitely have a future as one of those helicopter traffic reporters there, as you did your flyover. So I'm glad with that. So we've talked a lot about a lot of things in and around the area, but what about the intersection itself? One of the recommendations that came out of the Phase 1 working group was for an interchange there. Why is that sort of not the first thing that gets done? Why are all these other things kind of being focused on as opposed to just getting some kind of an overpass or something at the 5 Points intersection itself?
Sure. Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about the implementation plan and the different tiers within it?
I will, sure. There are, as I mentioned in the bar chart, there are a number of, well, there's 78 total recommendations. As you might imagine, DelDOT and Sussex County can't possibly take on all 78 recommendations at once. And the fact that progress was made on almost half of them in the first year is pretty remarkable. If you look at category E in the implementation plan, now that I've closed the website, that's unfortunate, but look at category E. It's the last one. It's in yellow. There are 9 recommendations, and they consist of E1, provided grade separation at 5 points, which was a very popular recommendation by both the working group and the public. And then 8 other recommendations that have smaller but no less impactful improvements in the area. So a lot of the problems that you see at 5 points, including westbound traffic during peak periods, are caused by the connector to Plantation Road and Beaver Dam Road. And the Plantation Road Phase 1 project, which I showed earlier, is going to address a lot of those. The Mulberry Knoll Road extension north to Route 9, which Josh mentioned earlier, is also going to serve as a relief valve to traffic on Plantation Road and other areas. So it's best for us to provide these modest improvements. They're still very significant, but they're less than a grade separation, to see how they work, understand how they affect traffic patterns in the area, understand what their benefits are. Because a grade separation at 5 points, we have no doubt, although no work has been done on potential options for many years. There was an initial study several years ago. It's going to be impactful. It's going to impact a number of properties. It's going to be under construction for a long time, and it's going to have a lot of impact to traffic during construction. So for obvious reasons, for the benefit of the community, it's really advantageous not to advance that project until we've done all of the other fixes that we possibly can. Does that make sense, Shantae? Are there things you'd like to add?
That was a great summary, Jeff. Yes, we, from a cost benefit standpoint for a project of that magnitude, we have to make sure that the cost, which is going to be significant because of the impacts to surrounding businesses, as well as how wide that intersection is, we need to make sure that we're doing our due diligence with all of the other projects within the area that may, route traffic a little bit differently and maybe take some people out of that intersection. And so then looking at the overall grade separation, we'll see what the benefit is and whether or not it's something that we want to move forward with.
Yeah, excuse me. I can add a little bit from the working group perspective too. It was, you could probably imagine it was identified very early on in the working group process that needs to be one of the, proposed recommendations was handling that intersection itself and looking at grade separation. But it was very, I thought it was very positive in the discussions we had as a working group that we all agreed that it would do something to help, but it wasn't the be all end all solution. And that really a lot of these, as Shantae and Jeff had said, a lot of these other improvements could be done first before we, make a final decision on that intersection. And then also this is a little bit more of a high level kind of topic. It's a little bit harder to kind of pin this down, but there was a lot of discussions amongst working group members at our small roundtables about, just the character of the area. We hear a lot of talk from residents about the character of Sussex County, and that, unfortunately, when you have a desirable area, people want to be there. There's going to be development, but there's some, like I said, just sort of side conversations about, does a grade separated intersection really kind of fit the character of the area that we want? So all those things kind of come into play, and that, if a grade separation is needed, it will certainly be evaluated. It's just maybe that's not the first thing we should do. So once again, there's been a lot of consensus amongst all of us working on this that that we will do that official study of that option at a later date.
Great.
And I can also add to that, Josh. I'm glad you brought up that point because as most folks are aware, there's a series of grade separations that are happening along Route 1 that are essentially, as part of the corridor capacity preservation program, are providing a safer alternative to left turns across or on Route 1 at various locations. So some are in place, Milford is in place, Route 30 is in place, others are under development. We already mentioned Minos Conaway and Cave Neck, and those are developed in such a way that they're more rural interchange types. So the ramps are kind of sweeping. There's a lot of grass in the area. It's not quite as urban a solution at the 5 Points area because there's so much development already existing. Because, quite frankly, Shantae mentioned there's cost is a concern, and land is very expensive at the beach area. It's likely we're not going to have wide sweeping ramps. We'll likely have retaining walls and other types of structures that are needed to fit an effective interchange into the smallest footprint possible. So it's really going to be a big change to the area to have that implemented. And I think it's important to, as both Shantae and Josh mentioned, move forward with other options first, gauge their effectiveness, and not avoid a grade separation, but see if we can do our best to develop other solutions that are less impactful first.
Okay, we did get another question. Is there a traffic light on Route 9 to completely stop people from making a right to the proposed turnaround? I assume by the turnaround, we're talking about the roundabout.
Right. So as I read that question, so there will still be a traffic signal on Route 9 at that connector road is what we're calling it. Basically, the signal that exists today behind Ace Hardware will still exist on Route 9. But what gets replaced with the roundabout is the T intersection that allows free flow traffic from vehicles coming off of 9 to either make a left or right onto Beaver Dam or Plantation. That intersection, the connector, as Jeff mentioned, gets significantly longer as well as wider, so better capacity for the different lanes. And you have the roundabout now as the traffic control feature instead of a two-way stop and constant flow from Route 9. I hope that answers your question. If not, please type in the chat box and we can get better information to you.
So just for our attendees, again, we're getting close to wrapping up. We're going to end right around 11 o'clock. We do have one final poll question we'd love for you to participate in, and just one last sort of closing slide. So, but Shantae, at the very beginning when Jeff started the presentation, he talked about it's nice to kind of focus on things that aren't related to COVID-19 and all of the impacts that has had. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what DelDOT has seen during this sort of stay-at-home period. Obviously, things are starting to free up a little bit here, but maybe what you saw, what the impacts have been to DelDOT, and maybe what no one has a crystal ball, but what we see kind of going forward as we fully enter the beach season here.
Sure. So obviously the pandemic has been a significant hurdle for all of us. We were able to continue all of our projects. So we had staff move from out of the office to telecommuting, and I'm happy to report that all of their projects are still on schedule. We made that transition really quickly, and it worked really well because of some of the kind of planning that we had ahead of time in terms of technology. So project schedules are still holding. We were able to continue with construction. So the governor did make construction an essential industry. And so all of our projects kept moving. And because of the reduced traffic volumes, we were able to give the contractor more hours to work. So typically, once we hit that May timeframe, we significantly reduced their work hours, especially in the beach areas. So we were able to allow them to do daytime lane closures and get a lot of work done. So you'll see the Route 1 and 5 intersection. Those intersection improvements were implemented with very few traffic impacts. We've got the Route 24 widening project under construction. They were able to do some closures of different roads to take care of utility relocations, again, with minimal traffic impacts. We saw at the most about a 40 to 50% traffic volume reduction over the last 3 months. It has definitely picked up over the last couple of weeks. So we're transitioning back to our typical, lane closure restrictions. You can only do things from 9 to 3 or overnight, no Thursday really through Sunday work, et cetera. But we were able to hold schedules for all of our projects. In terms of funding, right now we're in a decent place. While we did experience some revenue loss due to people not driving and not coming to DMV as much to title their vehicles and get driver's licenses, et cetera. We were able to find a stopgap for that for the next 18 months. So that's, again, why our project schedules aren't changing. And we're hopeful that either the federal government will provide some assistance to the state DOTs or that we will, figure something else out kind of in the long term. And the other thing that we've been doing as a department is seeking out any grant opportunities. So not within the 5 Points area, but not too far away, the Georgetown East Gateway project out near the Cheer Center and Sussex Academy, just east of Georgetown. We got a grant for that project a couple of years ago, and that project is going to construction soon. So we're trying to pursue kind of every avenue to make sure that our projects keep moving forward because we know how important improvements are throughout the state, and especially in this 5 Points and Sussex County area.
Great, thank you for that overview. We did get one last question, so we'll do this question and then we'll Jeff will come back to you to kind of wrap up the presentation. But is there any kind of an illustration of the intersection of Robinsonville Road and Plantation Road, kind of the work that Jante that you talked about? Is that on the DelDOT website? And if so, where could this person find that information?
It sure is. So on, again, if you go to deldot.gov/projects, type in the word plantation, the Plantation Road Phase 1 project will pop up. And if you scroll down to the bottom of that project website, you'll see the conceptual plans that were presented at workshops. And if you need us to email you a plan, please provide your email address and we'll make sure to do that.
Great. So Jeff, I'm going to bring it back to you to kind of close it out and we'll do our last poll question.
Thank you, Andrew. If you haven't already, we have a 5 Points Transportation Study survey, accessed again through the regular website and clicking on Virtual Open House. That online survey will be open until next Friday, June 12th. We've already received a healthy response, and we'd love to get your opinions as well. Not too long of a survey, but we hope the questions are meaningful to you and you have an opportunity to provide input there as well. So with that in mind, we have one final question for you that I mentioned earlier. So Jen, if you'd like to pop up the final poll question, and Andrew, I'll go ahead and take this. DelDOT's considering online engagement opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to in-person meetings in the future. So based on today's meeting, which do you prefer? A, I'm more likely to attend an in-person meeting. B, I'm more likely to attend an online meeting. C, I like having both options available. D, it depends on the topic. Or E, not sure. It has definitely been interesting preparing for online meetings in a time when DelDOT has always been very focused on lots of in-person engagement. But so far, we've been pretty pleased with the results, and we hope you have been too. All right, so Jen, if you can go ahead and close that out, please. The results should pop up momentarily. So the folks who responded are more likely to attend an online meeting as opposed to in person. So I certainly don't think that DelDOT is going to have any interest in going away from in-person meetings. It's very important for us to meet people where they are, but it's really nice to hear that online is also a great option for some folks. So thank you for that. And with that, we really want to sincerely thank you for your participation today. It means a lot to us to take time out of your schedule, especially on a Saturday. We're glad this timing was useful to you. I mentioned earlier that we will be meeting as a working group on Monday, July 27th at 6 p.m. We don't yet know whether that's going to be in person or online. It depends a lot on what restrictions are at the time and what venues are available. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to offer, please don't hesitate to reach out to Jen Sinelli Miller, DelDOT's project manager for the 5 Points Transportation Study, at her email address that you've seen on our slides or at the phone number that's shown here. With that, again, thank you very much. We hope you have a pleasant and safe day.